Bridgerton is finally back. The most famous historical romance show ever put to screen tells the story of each Bridgerton sibling one season at a time. We saw Daphne Bridgerton capture the heart of the emotionally closed-off rake Duke of Hastings. We saw emotionally closed-off rake Anthony Bridgerton fall madly in love with his almost sister-in-law Kate Sharma. We saw an emotionally confused rake Collie Bridgerton fall in love with his admirer/friend Penelope Featherington. Now it's time for the emotionally inconsistent rake Benedict Bridgerton to fall in love with housemate Sophie Beck. The series has been praised and criticized for selecting a semi-colorblind cast not only as background characters but as leads in sweeping romantic stories, a rarity even in the 2020s, with the production's treatment of its actors and characters of color coming under question since season 1. There's also been the question, if all systems of oppression are in effect at the same time, how come women, all women, are still subjected and governed by misogyny in love stories meant for us to fantasize about? Well, notice how all Bridgerton male leads can be described using almost the same words? That is because every male romantic lead is Mr. B, and every love story is Pamela. Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded by Samuel Richardson, is considered the first romance novel of the Occidental world. Released in 1693, it set itself apart from other novels by making its central focus the love story between the leads instead of a side plot point. It tells the story of 15-year-old Pamela Andrews through letters and diary entries meant to be read by her impoverished parents. She's a lady's maid, and when her boss passes, Pamela falls into the hands of the heir, Mr. B, a rake who consistently tries to seduce her, growing more invasive with every rejection. When Pamela tries to leave, Mr. B kidnaps her and plans to marry her off to someone more befitting of her social station. His harassment escalates to the point of assault, and Pamela, feeling that she lost the only thing of value to her, her virtue, starts showing signs of madness. It is only after seeing her state and reading the diary entries he stole from her that Mr. B realizes he's been mistreating her and that he loves her. He proposes, and when Pamela rejects him, he actually lets her go. But then she realizes she loves him and goes back to him in the end. The novel was consistently criticized for its careless wave of social barriers in the name of love. However, it was also recognized for its portrayal of what one might call romantic violence towards lower-class members of society, explicitly acknowledging that Mr. B would be unable to exert such terrible tactics without consequences had it not been for Pamela's helplessness as a poor woman. Richardson uses Pamela as a vessel for naivete and virtue, and finds that marrying Mr. B and eventually adopting his bastard child to be a befitting reward despite his previous behavior, as she ends up a rich, celebrated woman, admired by those who easily rejected her when in poverty.
You're right.
The rake as a stock character was inspired by morally corrupt men, eventually referring particularly to those who constantly romance women and are known for it. Both wealth and the womanizer reputation of a rake are essential parts of his appeal, as enjoying the fruits of his romantic experience and privilege while taming his wild urges allows the object of his affection both pleasure and validation while maintaining her virtue, which for women has largely meant virginity or at least vast inexperience. Thus, the rake became the perfect hero for romantic literature, offering readers a socially acceptable way to lust after the most desirable and often unattainable of lifestyles, surrounded by comfort and wealth, with the protection of those things, but without explicitly paying the price with their vulnerability or even discomfort of having a repelling or dangerous partners. But times change, women change, as do their desires. Well, do they?
And I had a college degree, and I was a very, very bright student. and it made absolutely no difference. Not one of my.
The first wave of feminism, while extremely controversial in its investment in protecting women from social and particularly legal disenfranchisement, was not necessarily seen as a separation from the male gender. Second wave, however, had its eyes set on liberation, especially through the independence that work and earning a wage offer. Then again, for a large portion of women, mostly women of color, the focus would be on the right to earn an appropriate wage and not face work discrimination in the career they were already in due to financial need. Seeing their obligation to be attached to a man for survival simmer down, women through the 60s, 70s, and 80s would surely turn away from stories that permitted men to exhibit corrupt and abusive behavior and still end up presented as a viable and sensible choice for a husband.
Please, come with me to the world of romance, where every woman's fantasy can come true.
Body strippers rose to popularity during the 1970s. A subgenre within romance, the controversial novels told stories of older times, led mostly by virginal, naive young ladies and possessive, dictatorial, rich, rakish men, usually novels but not exclusively so. These books seem to follow the outline drafted in Pamela. The story arc usually finds the heroine and hero unwillingly attracted to each other, with the heroine showing the most restraint, as any respectable girl should do when encountered with a promiscuous man. Still, she is forced to maintain proximity, either by mostly harmless social engagements or, in more cases than you'd think, the male lead kidnapping or in any other way depriving the female lead of freedom. Assault, whether explicit or implied, often occurs, as does a softening of the rake as he falls in love, showing a gentler side of him that, in turn, makes the protagonist fall in love. The 1960s had laid the groundwork for feminist talking points to be broadcast in mainstream society, with books like Freedom's The Feminine Mystique, protest in favor of women's rights, especially regarding sexual agency and workplace protections, and the Kennedy administration making gender inequality an acknowledged issue. By the 1970s, the gender divide between women and men was clear, or rather, the divide between progressive women, often seen as the pill taking, ball busting professional woman who was destined to be alone, and the traditional woman, one that understood her place to be in the home, supporting the interests of her husband and children, disregarding any of her own desires in service of a well-functioning home for others. Feminists were painted as man-hating, aggressive women who were destined for loneliness due to their scary looks and/or personalities, which were often credited as the reasons for their man-hating in the first place. Essentially, women's rights was an unattractive woman's issue that, instead of accepting their fate as spinsters, tried to find pride in their loneliness. Unless they were lesbians, of course, in which case they were just jealous of men's ability to be with a woman properly. But how is this related to body strippers and similar love stories? In her 1984 book Reading the Romance, Women, Patriarchy, and Popular Literature, Janice A. Radway tasked herself with examining romance novels through reader response criticism, which offers us a rare look into avid romance readers of the 80s. Radway conducted 60 hours of individual and group interviews, observation, and questionnaires with 42 women from a Midwestern American town, discovering that the most common profile for romance readers there was middle class, stay-at-home mother, at least high school educated, somewhere between the ages of 25 and 49 years old. The women cite escapism of daily life, along with its wifely and motherly responsibilities, as the main reason to choose romance stories, and the learning possibility as the main reason to choose books over television. While it might be easy to dismiss these women for their choice in books, which even at the time were deemed inferior due to their repetitive nature and the prioritization of feeling over plot development, the readers consistently marked a distinction between good and bad romance books. preferring stories with bright, determined heroines, spectacularly masculine heroes who are still capable of remarkable empathy and tenderness, antagonism, and gradually developing love, as opposed to a heroine who is abused by men, multiple rapes, woman being hurt by a man only to fall in love with him in the last 4 pages, explicit sex, promiscuity, or a hero involved with several women. Although certain books' popularity put into question some of those critiques, particularly those about violence more than those about sex and cheating. The study does not necessarily mean that independent, feminist minded women were not reading romance books in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. However, with the divisive social climate around feminine issues, they were probably not eager to advertise those reading habits. Meanwhile, a subset of female liberation started in underground music girl groups, the Riot Girl movement, championed girl power and community building amongst women above societal acceptance, which accidentally birthed the Spice Girls, an executive crafter girl group that championed girl power, dressed in skimpy and colorful clothing and marketable branding. In a world where feminists were painted as ugly, man-scary, man-hating ogres, the Spice Girls emphasized power in femininity, supporting women and being fun and sexy, pioneering the non-compromising pseudo-feminist, an important consumer of today's media. Recent surveys and studies, including an update on Radway's survey published on Still Reading Romance, edited by Josephine Smith and Kathleen W. Taylor Coleman, found that romance is still mainly read by women, with most readers, 60%, being coupled, most of them married, and a significant amount, nearly 50%, having children. However, the 2025 book mentions that vast majority had some form of higher education, with 85% of readers question having at a minimum a bachelor's degree. Along with changing audiences, romance has expanded, with more diverse stories about less exceptional but more sensible characters becoming extremely popular. However, we would be foolish not to recognize the footprints of Mr. B in many male heroes, especially the most popular ones.
Before we truly dive into the Bridgerton waters, I want to acknowledge how easy it could be to assume the misogyny baked into it to be a result of its historical setting. In 2017, Romance Writers of America conducted a survey which discovered that the most popular subgenres were suspenseful romance, erotic, historical romance, and contemporary. So let me remind you some of the most famous books in those subgenres, which in order are Hunting Adeline, 50 Shades of Grey, Bridgerton, and Ugly Love. All stories that have been repeatedly criticized for its oppressive or downright dangerous ideas, which are sold as part of an epic love story. Within the Bridgerton book series, which started its run in the year 2000, we have novels that follow the Bridgerton siblings as each one falls in love during the British Regency era. It wasn't until it fell on the hands of legendary writer-producer Shonda Rhimes that it became a global phenomenon. From the beginning, Bridgerton attracted attention as a high-budget, color-blind, romantic historical romance, which simply means that the cast would be comprised of actors of any race without consideration for historical accuracy. This is exactly what makes it an amazing piece to study, a show that openly breaks away from historical accuracy in service of welcoming a large audience into a romantic fantasy, and still follows classic romantic tropes that rely on misogyny to produce aspirational relationships. In season 1 of Bridgerton, the raceless society was perceived by the public as a natural aspect of the world building that was not expected to be explained. After all, it premiered in the year 2020, where there was no excuse needed to have the best actors for the job performing a fictional love story. But the series did attract criticism for its lack of dark-skinned young women, along with the sexualization of black men, all while ignoring the implications of the real historical period and figures around the story. Season 2 and the spin-off series Queen Charlotte then tried to have their cake and eat it too. Now, in canon, racism did exist in the Bridgerton world. However, it was eradicated through the marriage and, of course, love between King George and Queen Charlotte. All in time for a Bridgerton lead to freely and without racial prejudice fall in love and live amongst wealthy and powerful people of color barely a couple decades later. The concept of intersectionality, coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, encapsulates the idea that all systems of oppression are in effect at the same time. Under this philosophy, one cannot isolate the experience of being a woman from the experience of being black, or the experience of being South Asian from the experience of being gay, if one encompasses all of those identities. Still, shows like Bridgerton try to sell you a fantasy of colorblindness and perhaps even gay liberation, let's wait and see, but still keep misogyny as a main plot point to complete romantic arcs. Before I go any further, I wish to clarify that the intention of including people of color in reality-inspired fantasy worlds is not a bad one. On the contrary, still, shows like Bridgerton can be careless with their approach to such delicate matters. There's no reason why something as complex as racism should be painted as easily waved away by one marriage. In my opinion, stories that simply never acknowledge the issue if they're unequipped to handle it fare much better in offering escapism to people of color in the audience. Essentially, Bridgerton has treated race without much care or nuance, and there's no proper way to separate racial discrimination and sex-based discrimination. So, how does it portray men-women relationships? Well, misogyny has become the main romantic plot tool to move romance forward in this show. How? Well, during season 1, Daphne Bridgerton allies herself with Simon, Duke of Hastings, in an effort to regain male attention without seeming desperate after her brother Anthony scared all of them away because he tried to protect her and her honor, which, as the man of the house, he believed to be his duty, responsibility, and right. Then Simon and Daphne fall in love and are distanced by his refusal to marry, but they're forced to do so anyway after falling prey to their desires, when Anthony considers Simon to have defiled Daphne and thus must marry her to save her reputation and direction of her entire life, and that of her sisters. Then during season 2, Anthony Bridgerton is choosing a wife, as it is his social duty to produce an heir. His criteria considers only the woman's ability to bear and raise children. At the same time, Kate Sharma, who dedicated her whole life to educating her younger sister as the perfect lady so she could earn a beneficial marriage in order to survive without a male figure, their father, to support them, is painted as a scary spinster because she's strong-willed and 27 years old. Anthony and Kate are attracted to each other from the beginning, but Anthony's belief that he must marry the most socially desirable lady, Kate's sister, Edwina, causes most of that season's tension. During season 3, social wallflower Penelope Featherington gives herself a makeover, partially motivated by her longtime crush's dismissal, partially wanting to marry and establish her own household apart from her chaotic family, which, despite being wealthy thanks to her secret gossip column, is only achievable by marrying a man. Meanwhile, her crush, Colin Bridgerton, finds himself playing the role of a hegemonic man of the Regency era, as his true lover-boy self left him heartbroken. Said role involves having a lot of meaningless sex and charming debutantes without much care as a way to show social dominance. But he's still a good friend and coaches Penelope through the newly gained attention, as well as lending her some social cachet by constantly accompanying her around as an eligible man, who makes her, of course, more valuable. Now, in season 4, Benedict Bridgerton will have the difficult choice between honoring and marrying the woman he loves and protecting his family's, particularly his sister's, reputation and standing in society. Benedict falls for Sophie Beck, a charming and brilliant girl who happens to be a maid, which makes her less valuable in society's eyes and thus would diminish his own family's value, perhaps making his own kin unfit for marriage, leaving them lonely and partially unprotected. Their saving grace, turns out, is Sophie's relationship with an important nobleman, her own father, because while her being an illegitimate child makes her controversial, at least she has blood of a worthy man, so she steps above mere servitude and can be passed as a lady in the eyes of society. It is consistent that the heroes or heroines are meant to overcome are created through little to no fault of their own, but as a result of misogynistic environments, protecting them from viewers' backlash, but also dulling their arcs and flattening the humanity that could be reading into them. In contrast, the men display consistent red flags, yes, but some that they can learn from to become sensible partners and more well-rounded characters. The Bridgerton men in particular showcase care and worry about the women in their family and their reputation, as they have an understanding of how they could escape most consequences for their actions, where their female relatives would probably take a hit and lose any prospect of a good life if they are scandalous in any way. Such care is not always displayed by our heroes. Still, women in Bridgerton and many other romantic stories are consistently forced into proximity to the man they end up falling in love with, and trapped in uncomfortable or risky situations thanks to little more than the control society imposes upon them. Even the Bridgerton sisters, whose lives are ruled by mostly understanding brothers, cannot roam around alone, always risking that unsupervised behavior could be turned into a trap. It seems like only through robbing our heroines of their agency, romantic stories can make them find a match, or more often, stick to irritating men long enough to discover the lovely qualities under their bad habits. In 1987, Andrea Dworkin released her now infamous book, Intercourse, in which the radical feminist proposes the thesis that women's subordination is an essential part of both men and women's sexual experiences. This controversial take was received as Dworkin calling all heterosex as oppressive. In reality, she embarked on a multimedia analysis from religious texts and classic literature to pornography, noting the consistent theme of female subordination and theorizing these constant imaging molded expectations of both men and women around intercourse, shaping what they find erotic. Intercourse does not propose that it is inherently unethical to engage in heterosex. It recognizes the effect of social exposure in the development of our sexual identity and fantasies, creating a chicken and the egg question. Women might consume stories like Bridgerton without question, even consume it with enjoyment, which impulses the entertainment industry to keep investing in them. But has the same industry not perpetuated the idea that love equals entrapment for decades? Is there any interest in creating free loving narratives? Do we even know what that might look like? Making the misogyny in these stories not an acknowledgement of its existence in the world, but an essential in heterosexual courting, limiting the agency and power of a woman until she falls in love, simply implies that when given free choice, a good woman would not naturally love the options available to her, and perpetuates that men have no need or ability to rise to that occasion.